Today I'm joined by Rafał, who's the head of the design team at Piwik PRO. And in this webinar, we will be talking about the best practices for data visualization. Rafał, your role in Piwik PRO is very exciting and interesting, and so is your whole journey with the company. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Hello. So I'm with the company from the beginning, and as a multidisciplinary designer, I helped transition Piwik PRO from a simple tool to an enterprise platform that it is today, both on the front of brand design as well as product design. So I'm often a reason why things look and work as they do.
Great, thanks so much for the introduction. Well, you guys can see that Rafał is an expert in design, and he's definitely the right person to tell us all the secrets of effective data visualization. And we hope that after this webinar, you'll be more comfortable with understanding the numbers that Piwik PRO collects for you. But before we move on to graphs and charts, let's take a look at today's agenda. So first, we'll be talking about the basics of data visualization, and we will explain why presentation is so important. Then we'll share a couple of practical tips of how to visualize your data in the way that your audience understands it. And after that, we'll move on to our platform and show you how Piwik PRO can support you with your data visualization journey. Last but not least, as always, we will run a Q&A session. So if you have any question during this webinar, I encourage you to send them in the question box. Right, so let's jump into our topic for today. When I hear the term data visualization, I immediately think of graphic representation of data. And I think that you can all agree with me here, but we all know that this topic is more complex and wide than it seems. So Rafał, how would you as a designer define data visualization?
So the standard definition of data visualization is in fact a graphical representation of information. It's a way of using visuals like graphs, maps, charts, and dedicated software to simplify data and make sense out of it by presenting it in a clear and simple manner, reveal trends, provide analysis, and predict outcomes for all kinds of projects. In reality, data visualization is a really broad and vast topic. Animated simulations, maps, multidimensional diagrams, infographics, all of those items can be categorized as some form of data visualization. It's one of those topics that many books were written about. Before you run, though, you must learn to walk, because nowadays bad graphs are everywhere. And in school, we learn a lot about language and math, but it's rare that these two sides are paired. No one teaches us how to tell stories with numbers. So being able to visualize data and create engaging narration with it is key to turning it into information that can be used to drive better decision making. So let's start by looking at a number of examples of good practices, mostly from the web analytics world. But the principles we're going to be talking about are pretty universal to any field. And at the end, we will give you a roadmap for how to expand your knowledge later.
Right, you said one thing that brought a question to my head, and you said that at school nobody teaches us how to tell stories with numbers. And why is it so important then? What are the benefits of visualizing the data?
So there are many benefits, of course, and let's go over what I think are the most important ones, which I listed here. So visual representation makes your data more accessible and understandable, and that's important since information collected via analytics tools tends to be highly complex. You need to transform it into digestible chunks if you want to get the most of it. Furthermore, it boosts engagement of your audience. Half of the battle with reporting on your organization metrics is getting your audience attention, and the other half is getting them to take action. And data visualization helps you build engagement on both fronts. Data visualization helps you improve analysis. It makes it easy to see trends and predict outcomes. Compare your performance to past years and months, or different data sets against one another. In web analytics, they often help you to measure links between your product, content, and conversion otherwise would go unnoticed. Data visualization will help you save time as well, because raw numbers forces you, the reader, to do the work, and proper data visualization does that work for you. Complex data translated into visual format is not only easier to memorize, but also handier to share or present to a wider audience. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it helps you tell stories with data. The overwhelming amount of data makes it harder to understand what stories it's actually telling or the question it's answering. Its prime value is that it can provide business leaders with confidence and rationale for better decision making. There's this famous one of the oldest data graphics created by Charles Minard, and it mapped Napoleon's invasion of Russia. So the chart depicts the size of the army as well as the path of Napoleon's retreat from Moscow. And it ties that information to the temperature and time scales for a more in-depth understanding of that event. So visualization like this one, where one chart tells a story you would need several pages of text to tell, are the most satisfying ones, but also the hardest to create.
Well, I agree that this was a great example, and it only proves that people have been using visuals for such a long time that I'm sure by now there must be some rules of an effective data visualization. Could you share them with us?
Yes, of course. So there's many principles, but today let's start with 5, in my opinion, most important ones. We'll go through them, trying to showcase as much as we can on real-life examples. So number 1, context is everything. So always start with basics. So the who, the what, and the how. Know the requirement of the visualization. So this allows you to create a chart that conveys a message in a clear and crystal manner. Also, it makes sure that you aren't overloading your chart with unnecessary information that might confuse your audience. And therefore, know what is required of the visualization and keep it simple by highlighting a specific point. Know your audience. Before making the visualization, it's best to ask yourself what the audience will be looking for in the chart. So understand the requirements and preferences of your viewer. Know their background. Do they have enough time for a detailed visualization? How aware are they about the context of visualization? What additional information are they looking for, and so on, so on. And then lastly, know how you will deliver your visualization. So are you preparing a report, a dashboard for your team to track metrics on, a presentation for your manager, or infographic? So consider the intricacies of that medium. So let's try to translate it into the world of web analytics. So for example, there are many metrics that are tricky to interpret without context. Let's take numbers of pages per visitor. So does smaller numbers mean less engaged users or more optimized user path? Or take high numbers of number of sessions. So is it good news because we've got a new source of traffic? Or does spam bots attacking your sites with lower quality traffic, or maybe new ad campaign that isn't quite working well?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense to start with establishing what you want to present and to whom. So if I know this already, how do I choose the right method for it?
Yes, choosing appropriate methods are really important. So my advice is just to use a familiar chart type. It can be a fun exercise to experiment with unique and straight chart types, but your audience shouldn't have to learn how to read them on the spot. And in most cases, you should only use one of the more common charts, like line chart or bar charts. So let's get a closer look to some of them, especially the ones that are useful web analytics and are used in Piwik PRO Analytics Suite. Sadly, overviewing all of the different types of charts isn't really possible today, as there's just so many of them, and you can use websites like flowingdata.com or datawizcatalog.com to get a full overview of the wealth of different charts that exist. So let's start with line charts. Line charts are great for comparing lots of data all at once. And mainly showing changes and trends over time. You can easily include on them the additional important context or an annotation or highlight anomalies. On the other hand, they're not necessarily your best choice for displaying quantities of things, working with categorical data, so or making part to whole comparisons or showing sparse data sets. So in Piwik PRO Analytics Suite, we help you with using this diagram correctly by pre-selecting time as a necessary dimension. Next, we have bar charts, also known as column charts. So they come in handy when showing the contrast between different values. You can use them for nominal or using another term, categorical variables. In web analytics world, examples of those variables would be a social media channel or a web traffic source or geographical region. And few additional tips here. Order the data series. So unless you're working with dates, you can greatly improve the readability of the chart by sorting the series, either ascending or descending. And another one is to use a horizontal bar chart when you have long labels in your data set. So in Piwik PRO Analytics Suite, you can build either bar charts or grouped bar charts or stacked bar charts. Another classic is a pie chart. They kind of earned a bad reputation for being misleading because the truth is that it's hard to compare the slices. However, if you apply them to present relative proportions and percentages, I think you'll be good. So there's two primary use cases for a pie chart. So one would be if you want your audience to have a general sense of the part to whole relationship, and comparing the precise sizes of the slices is less important. And the second one would be to convey that one segment of the total is relatively small or large. Again, few rules here. Add no more than about 5 slices to a pie chart. The more slices in a pie chart, the more difficult it's going to be to show the user any meaningful story, and you'll end up having to come up with some goofy solutions to show the labels or make hover interaction work if you're making an interactive one. Next, sort your data meaningfully. So general rule is to go from the largest dimension value to the smallest and start from the top and go clockwise. You can eliminate the legend and label the data directly. That can help you. And lastly, forget about 3D charts because 3D tricks your eyes into thinking some slices are bigger than they are in reality. In Piwik PRO Analytics, we don't allow you to show more than 7 dimensions in a pie chart, and we throw all the other values into the 8th one, which is generated automatically and just labeled other like other values, right? Next, we have funnel charts, which are one of 2 more advanced types of charts in Piwik PRO Analytics Suite. They are a great way to demonstrate stages of various processes and help to spot potential roadblocks. A funnel typically starts with 100% and then progressively narrows towards the bottom, allowing to easily identify the stages impacting the reduction in value. And the second more advanced chart is a Sankey diagram. Sankey diagrams show flow from one state to the next, and in Piwik PRO Analytics, we use them to visualize sequences of user interactions in an aggregated way. A flow is also somewhat of a sequence, like in funnel, but for certain use cases like well-defined user paths, using Sankey chart is not the most comfortable idea. The funnel chart is more optimized and will be a better choice. In Piwik PRO Analytics Suite, there's also, of course, data tables. And data table can be included as a data visualization technique. I will not focus on them today much, but fundamentally designing good tables is similar to designing good charts. Generally, rule is make cell padding big enough, get rid of unnecessary borders, don't use dark colors for backgrounds. Your text should be horizontally aligned to the left, numbers should be aligned to the right, and you should probably use consistent string formatting. And for the last point, consider if you need a chart at all. So no graph is really needed when the data set is small. So if your visual looks too simple, you can just summarize it with using text and a single number.
Cool. So you've presented all the methods that are available in Piwik PRO, but like you said before, we can create many different types of visuals. My question is there any way to use data from Piwik PRO somewhere else?
Yes, of course, you can always export any data set or get access to raw data through our API and use other tools to generate different types of charts.
Great.
So, and to wrap up this point, picking out the appropriate chart really can do a big difference. So take this example from the book Storytelling with Data. This group bar chart is examining the average price of different products over a few years. And there's nothing really bad about it. But switch it to line charts and they start telling a story of all the products converging on one price point and how potentially new product in that segment should position itself on the market.
Great, thanks so much. And so now that we know how to deliver our message using the most appropriate method, is there anything else that we should keep in mind while designing it? Can you give me some tips on that?
Yes, so there's few things that I'm going to put together in a category called reducing cognitive load. Cognitive load is the sensation felt when facing a non-conventional design or intricate visualization. It's kind of a mix of confusion and laziness that immediately creates a mental barrier for consuming information. When the required effort to understand the message is too high, your audience will disengage. And simple visuals are preferred for easier consumption and understanding. Cognitive load dictates both the ability and the motivation of your audience to interact with your information. So let's go some methods of reducing it. So first, remember you can guide viewers through your visualization using color, size, and of elements and weight of your text. Human eyes usually skim over the whole picture first, and after the brain realizes that the content is not text-based, that the eyes focus attention on things like labels or data points. So the planned visual hierarchy helps to organize information and showcase to your audience what's important. Next, choose the right amount of data to display. You need to find the right balance between complexity and clarity to create a chart that's both legible and persuasive. Ideally, you want to find the lowest common denominator, the smallest amount of data that will support the point you're trying to make. Web analytics data in particular has this repeating characteristic that doesn't always help when data is grouped by day So consider changing your granulation to weekly or monthly. Next is a rule often called ink to data ratio. So basically increase the amount of pixels used to display data. Don't be afraid of white spaces. They should be used to reduce saturation and guide attention and eliminate visual elements that do not add information to make your data stand out more. And by that, I mean, don't apply background colors to the chart area. Don't use 3D effects or any other fancy effects such as like gradients, pattern fills, or shadows, etc., etc. Don't try to enhance your charts with clip art or pictures. Use grid lines only when it's helpful, and review if you're not maybe using too many labels, and maybe skip the legend if it doesn't really bring any additional value. And lastly, following the last point, use multiple charts if it's necessary. So sometimes we're trying to do just too much with one thing, and maybe a good idea is to just break it down.
Great, thanks so much. Well, I also know that the appearance of the charts plays a big role in understanding the message behind it. So could you share your secrets and tell us the do's and don'ts of a good presentation?
Yeah, so some advice from a graphic designer then. So data visualization is not just about numbers, of course. The text provides an important context that conveys the right message to the viewer. Headings, subheadings, and annotation that you put alongside the chart, the graphs or the charts explain what is being presented in the visualization. And these principles won't be as important in Piwik PRO Analytics Suite as we have a lot of that stuff predefined. But if you want to export the charts and work more on them, add to your reports, etc., so keep those principles in mind. So you can use chart titles to add an extra layer of information, presenting analysis derived from the data presented in the chart. Titles and labels state the purpose of your chart, while descriptions provide additional context. For example, you can add data sources, right? And in Piwik Pro dashboard, for example, it's the only way really to clearly explain what filters you use, besides the little filter indicator that we provide automatically. Next, think about dropping tooltips from your charts. They provide supplemental or expanded information, but to highlight something, maybe a better idea is just to label it directly on the chart, as you can see here. Also, highlight the chart data that lends itself to the narrative of the story. You can use color for that, or include labels or descriptions or any other annotations, just to make it easier to remember the key issues, right? And color. So color can have a lot of impact on the viewer, and the most basic rule is to remember to use the same color for the same kind of data, like in this example. And generating color palettes is a tricky subject, so a lot of tools will randomly assign them to data series, and you probably want to watch out for that. And here's a little side note about how we're doing it in Piwik Pro, because our analytics suite is an interactive platform and we need to generate colors automatically. So we have a 16 color palette that we adjust depending on how many different data series we want one chart to showcase. So if we only have 2, for example, we don't use the first 2 colors from one palette. We don't use 2 similar blues. We choose the one with more contrast, right? So we go to the last palette from the list here. And for pie charts, we take first 8 colors from the full color palette, because it has a little better soothing rhythm. And we have a separate color set for comparison mode. So to put an emphasis, when this mode of data browsing is on, we don't use any colors from our regular scheme. We use a totally different hues.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I didn't actually know this myself, so thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else that we should be watching out for?
So for the last point, be truthful to what the data shows you. In Piwik PRO Analytics platform, we implemented many restrictions and patterns to make sure you don't make or make as less a small number of those mistakes when creating charts as you can. But again, after you export it to many tools, the many tools will let you present it any way you want. So just be aware of the dangers of unintentional manipulation. And here I have a list of most common mistakes with which you can skew what your data is telling. And it's also will help you see from far away if anybody's trying to manipulate you with data, right? So the most common manipulation is avoiding baselines. It's used to emphasize or de-emphasize certain values, and it's really easy to do with most tools. The other very smart way of deceiving the viewer is to put an excessive amount of information in the graph. This creates confusion, and you can't focus on any particular trend. Another one is going against established conventions. So example of that would be using a green color to indicate something wrong or red to indicate something right, or just don't flip the y-axis just to be creative, like this chart here is trying to do. It wants to make you feel like it's showcasing a flowing blood, but instead it's just misleading with what it's trying to do. Next is not including complete data in the graph. It can give an incomplete picture to the viewer, resulting in incorrect decision making. So for example, visualizing only a small part of sales data that indicates an upward trend, while taken as a whole, there is actually a downward trend. And then we have a scenario where a data set contains null or missing data points. So if certain data points are missing, the chart needs to indicate that and not that the value is 0, but that there's a missing values, right? And or worse, some of them are simply ignoring the missing data completely, and they're connecting to neighboring points. And for the last one, remember that skewed aspect ratio can distort your charts, exaggerating the trend in charts that are too tall and flattening the trend in charts that are too wide, right? Generally speaking, the most appropriate aspect ratio for a chart is one where the width of the chart is about twice as long as the height is tall. And another general rule of thumb is to find the aspect ratio at which the average slope of the data line is about 45 degrees. So William Cleveland, a great of the data visualization world, has suggested that slopes are most readable at this angle. And that's all the principles I have for you today. To end, when designing around data, it's your responsibility to use your best judgment and creativity. However, data can be complex, and creating a meaningful story around that data isn't always a cookie cutter. So you might find that the data you're working with doesn't play well with some of the principles outlined here today, and it's okay. It's okay to break the rules sometimes, and I think that the important thing is to remember that you should test your designs against real world situations.
Great. This was a healthy dose of theory. Thank you for that. I'm sure you guys have a couple of questions to what Rafał has already told us. So make sure that you send them in the question box. But now, can we show our viewers those principles that you've mentioned in action?
Of course. So we're going to dive into Piwik PRO Analytics to see some of those principles and how can they translate into a real world.
Great.
Okay, so let's start with a quick overview of the reporting capabilities in Piwik PRO. So here we have a UI of our analytics module, and we'll be focusing on that one. Let's move to the report sections, which is basically a gallery of core reports, or more like a gallery of all of available data in our platform, and it's a collection of data explorers with which you can get a grasp on the data that is being collected for you and easily drill into them and sliced into categories you can see on that list. So Data Explorer is kind of a advanced data exploration tool, which is basically a nested data table. By nested, I mean you can drill down into another dimensions from the line items, like I do here, and that data table is connected with a line chart, which is plotting those line items. So it's either plotting by default the totals of the metrics listed in the table, but you can of course select any row items and plot them on the chart and select a metric that you want to see on here. So this is core reports, and if you want a greater control, you can customize any of the core report, and you will be thrown into, if you do that, it will be thrown into a custom report section. So it basically allows you to heavily filter and customize any core reports, but it also gives you access to or the simple charts and the more advanced charts we were talking about, mainly the funnel chart and user flow for all those more advanced analysis or charting, like in user flow example, user journey throughout our website. And then we have dashboards, of course, and dashboard is a way of putting a lot of static charts together. So reports and custom reports are a little bit more about exploration, and here we are creating an overview of a particular topic. Dashboards are basically for quick, glanceable data, and the data you come back to on a regular basis. So we talked about having context in mind. So here I have few dashboard examples showcasing just that. So I cooperate often with front-end developers, and we're tracking browse share in our traffic to know when to drop support for older ones, and we kind of have a line of a breakdown between the desktop users and smartphones. So we're trying to see if users are trying to use our panel, which is kind of suited for desktop use on their smartphones, and should we do anything about that? Here I have an example from marketing team where we can see a context of only paid media traffic, right? So they're interested only in traffic that is generating that they have to pay for to generate traffic. Our HR team is interested more in career pages, so they have their own little space prepared where they track traffic and few metrics, their most popular all job offers, etc., right? So that's a great example of or examples of customizing the data to a particular context. So you pick and choose what you're interested based on audience or given use case. So maybe you can also have a look through all of the chart types that we're going through and compare some of the better and worse use cases or errors that we can have with them. So firstly, here we have our counter. So this counter, so the name or the title of this counter is optional, as you can see, and maybe it's a better idea just to name it, especially because in filtering, it's basically showcasing us returning visitors from Poland, and not all of them, right? And the only way of knowing that would be with this little icon. And this one has its sparkline turned on, but of course it's not necessary. But that's just an additional little thing that doesn't really overload these widgets with information, gives you just a little dimension of the data.
I have a little question here because I can see on this background that there's a line and there's some dots. So would you be able to explain what exactly do they mean?
Yeah, so basically Sparkline is a small line chart that kind of wants to give you a taste or an overview of the trend. So is it going down or is it going upwards? And here with few little graphic elements, we indicate some additional values. So the blue dot is the current value. The red one is the minimal value in that date range. The green, of course, is the maximum data in that date range, and the dashed line is an average value for that data set.
Great, thanks so much.
So here we have an example of a line chart, and as you can, if we go into that widget, we see that we can kind of add and remove items from here, but the date dimension is added and fixed, so you can't really remove that one. We, as I said, use line charts only to show trends in time. but you can adjust the grouping, the granulations of data with these options here. Here I have a little bit worse example. As you can see, a trend is better showcased with line charts and a little bit worse with bars. Here I have a pretty bad example of a bar chart. So I was trying to do a breakdown of browsers in our traffic that our users are using and break them down by operating systems on what they're using, because most of the browsers nowadays have their clients available in all of the on all the major operating systems. And as I can see, if I just generate a simple bar chart, default bar chart, it's going to be set to a group bar chart. And if I want suited and won't adjust the dataset well, it's going to give me a lot of unnecessary rows of, really sometimes weird browsers that nobody ever heard of. So a good idea is to filter out your data set, right? So I'm mostly interested in Firefox, Safari, Chrome, and Edge because they have clients on all the operating systems. And I'm restricting also the data set to most major operating systems and not the mobile ones, for example, right? Also, I selected a stacked bar chart because the full bar gives me information about one particular browser, and then we kind of chunk it, split into parts of operating system, and that is most suitable for this use case, right? And it's still the majority of Chrome users are making this this one bar overwhelmingly bigger than the others, but it's much more readable than this weird long example from the beginning. So filtering in the report or any widget is one way of filtering data, and here I have another example of filtering just fixed with our different feature. So here I have a pie chart that is trying to plot page URLs, and as we can see, it's not the best dimension to use with pie charts. For one, the labels are really long, and we need to truncate them. And second, there's so many dimension values in that dimension that it's really, really granular, and we basically majority of them we need to aggregate into that other categories, right? But in Piwik Pro, we have dimension value groupings. So we basically grouped any interesting domain parts and URLs into buckets and into labels. We group them and we name them based on the categories of our site, sections of our sites, right? And as you can see, it creates a much better and more readable diagram, which isn't, it's kind of useful now, right? And using section categorization like that and filtering, you can adjust your charts to make them more readable like that.
Just quickly going back to the bat pie chart, what would you suggest would be a better way to present the URLs, for example?
So unfortunately, URLs are really long labels. Sometimes the bar chart, which is horizontal, maybe would help, but in reality, you either want to label the website, use page titles, or you want to put them into buckets with dimension groupings, grouping values, or just use a table. It's going to be much clearer that way.
That sounds great.
Yeah, and here's the last example that kind of showcases how naming and titling your widgets, how it's important in most of the platforms, but in our especially because we only have this little indicator that says something is filtered down, and basically we showcase that. So the charts are pretty similar, right? We showcase that we're plotting a session metric on both of them, but they have different shape, and the reality is that this one is basically heavily filtered, right? So I'm saying that it's first-time visitors from Benelux region, so this is a widget filtered by the countries of Benelux, and that the flag on returning visitor is new, right? So that's.
I've
Yes.
got a quick question, because before we were talking about exporting the data from Piwik PRO to different tools. Is there any chance you could show us an example of that?
Yes, in a minute I'll showcase how we can get data out of our platform and what we can do with that. Just ending our overview of Piwik PRO Analytics Suite, just want to mention that there's a lot of more capabilities to this platform. You can further aggregate your data from your website using meta sites that combine the websites into one bucket of data, for example. And remember, you have really powerful comparison features where you can both compare those charts, time ranges of your reports, as well as further use segments to filter them and compare them, right? So it gives you a really powerful tool of comparing and exploring the data. If it's still not enough for you, or you need to do something else with the data, for example, you want to prepare a report for your manager, you can always quickly export any report or any widget or any dashboard, like I'm doing here, for example, to any text formats like CSV, XML, or JSON, like we see here. That's a simple way of transferring chunks of data. You can also save your chat to an image in few formats or the PDF document. And all of those exports can be then scheduled and automatically sent by mail, of course. And of course, there's full access to raw data through our API, which requires a little more effort than simple export, but will give you a full control over the data you're tracking. So once you export that data, you probably want to use some type of visualization tool, and here there's many of them. Here I'm using a web version of Power BI, which is Microsoft tool for any advanced exploration and filtering of data. And here's that example that I had on that dashboard. So this is a list of traffic that went to our blog, and our blog posts are categorized with dimensional value groupings into categories, and here I have results data about that, and I can see which categories of the blog posts are most popular. So I had it there in a pie chart, right? But what we can basically do in tools like that, if we don't have any particular chart types, like we don't have in Piwik PRO horizontal bar charts, we can adjust. They have a much greater libraries of charts, so we can switch the bar chart pretty quickly. For example, what I can do here, I want to maybe I want to highlight the top category, right, and I'll add data labels. Here are already on, and maybe I can just copy this part of text, and here you can see probably changing the title names would be better. And so you can kind of see, that's of course dummy text, but you can see I'm starting to create some kind of report for my boss to read, for example, and it's much better. Those business intelligence tools are more suited to that, for example, those kind of use cases. And I think with that, we will conclude our demo. So that was Piwik PRO and then Microsoft Power BI in action as an example of the advanced tools that we that can help you with adjusting and building data visualization. And there's, as I said, plenty more on the market. And here I've listed the most popular ones that range from simple chart generation capabilities to advanced business intelligence platforms that will basically allow you to customize and adjust your data to any needs.
Great, Rafael. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I know that today we have a couple of guests who aren't our clients yet, and I'm really excited that they got to see our platform. But it was also very interesting for me, and I'm sure that our existing clients will agree with me here, to see it all from your point of view, as you're the person behind the design in Piwik PRO. And as we mentioned before, data visualization is a very complex topic, but I think we managed to deliver the essentials and answer some of your questions. But if you still have something that you'd like to ask us, you can send your questions for our Q&A session. And we've also prepared 5 highlights that we would like you guys to take away from today. First of all, make sure that you know your context, so then you can choose the most appropriate method to deliver your message. Remember not to overload your visuals with too much unnecessary information, and know the impact of text and colors. And last but not least, always present the accurate data. And just before we jump into our Q&A session, I'd like to share some learning materials for those of you who'd like to learn more about this topic. Right now you can see the list of communities on the screen. And Rafael, if you could go to the next slide. And now you should be able to see, yes, a list of very interesting books that we recommend. And we also based our webinar on that will explain data visualization in detail. But don't worry if you didn't get to save the links or the titles, because we will send you the slides after the webinar and along with the recording. So you'll be able to get back at it at any point. Right, so we're finished with the presentation part of the webinar, so I think we can start our Q&A session, and I can see that some of the questions are already coming through. So let me start with the first one. And the first question says, you had a visual for web analytics sessions. Which metrics do you recommend using? Sessions, page visits, users, for a basic website activity measurement?
So for my websites, I don't track users just for privacy concerns. I don't. It's not necessary for my private use. If I had access, so without access to that, sessions is probably better. But I really just look at all three of them. Sessions are more. I think the most often used by me. I would just see if the page views aren't too inflated in regards to page views, and if that difference isn't that big, page views are also okay. With pages is basically the question of if that number is inflated, why the users refresh that page so many times or got back to that page so many times, the same user, right? When comparing between the session numbers and the page view numbers. So it's kind of an indicator of itself if it's something wrong, but all three of those will work just fine. Often I would say sessions.
Great, thank you so much. The second question says, would it be possible to receive the presentation via email after this webinar? And I'll take this one because yes, we'll send you the presentation and we'll send you the recording of the webinar as well. So you should get it after the webinar. The third question is, in my experience, it is very difficult to effectively show data trends with the line charts while keeping the y-axis at 0. How important do you feel that best practice is, and how realistic is it to stick to that?
It's not really some of a hard principle. There are some cases when the trend you want to highlight some trend, some small trend, and zooming in on that chart is necessary. But for me, I don't know. For me, I feel somehow always manipulated when I see and kind of notice, because it's never clearly stated that the author of the chart is starting his chart from not from 0, but from really arbitrary position, right, or value. So if you can, in my opinion, if you can avoid it, just do it. Maybe maybe that trend isn't as noticeable. The fact that the trend isn't as noticeable that you want it to be, maybe it's telling something in the end, right?
Great, thank you. And now the fourth question says, usually the team, like HR from your example, would need some context to the numbers, like is their bounce rate bad, okay, or good? What source would you use to compare the data with, or you just use historic values and not values from other organizations?
Yeah, we're not using values from other organizations. We're basically launching an activity, right? So, for example, now we have we're building, we rebuild our website, so we're comparing the data to our historical numbers. And then we're gonna expand, for example, our career pages into additional sections, and we will it will measure engagement on those new sections in comparison to the engagement on the simple career pages that we have now. So it basically, we're trying to tie it together with our own KPIs, and if some activity, some campaign doesn't work, we know that not to repeat it and just to try something else. And gathering data from other organizations is usually much harder task. That's why we don't do it. If we could have get our hands on those, it would be probably an interesting exercise, of course, to compare ourselves to others.
Great, thank you. It's 5 already, but we have one more question, so let's just answer this one. And it says, is it possible to show how you imported data into the Power BI? Is it done with a CSV or is it through API?
So that was done through a CSV, that just for demo purposes. I don't think we have any instance hooked up through API to Microsoft Power BI. We have one with, I think, Google Data Studio. So that was just a quick example. There's like a separate section there to import a data set, they call it, and then you import it from a local file, and then you create report based on that data set, and you have access to all the dimensions or all the columns from that CSV you've imported from, in that case, Piwik PRO.
Great, thanks. There's one more question, which is also a feature request, which says, are you planning to make it possible to choose your own colors for the graphics? We would like to be able to add a note to a chart. Can you make this possible in the future?
So the color one is going to be tricky one. The ability to add notes to chart, yes, probably in the near future. I can't say anything about the dates, but we're transitioning our tool from an older version to a newer one. There was a limited capability to annotate your charts in an older analytics tool, and we don't have any features like that in the new one, but we will want to redesign them and make them much more powerful and usable. So there's gonna be probably several ways of annotating data. Can't say anything specific about the roadmap, unfortunately.
Great, thanks so much. I think that's this is all of the questions that we received. So if there's no further questions, I think we can wrap it up here. But if something comes to your mind later on, please drop us a message at css@piwik.pro. Or if you aren't our client yet, you can contact us through our website. And like I mentioned before, we will send you a recording from the webinar along with the slides to everyone who was registered. And additionally, we will upload it on our website under the webinar stuff, just in case you want to share with your colleagues or your friends. Rafael, thank you so much for joining me today, for making this webinar happen, and for sharing all your knowledge. It was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you for having me.
And again, a massive thank you to all of our viewers. It was great having you on today's webinar, and I hope to see you on our next one. Bye.